Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
So we're going to engage with the words of Parshat Vaera this morning. Vaera is a loaded parsha. Many of them are, but it's a really especially loaded parsha. As you know, I'm reading in light of kind of world events and where a lot of us feel we are right now. And so we're going to be doing the binding of Isaac this morning. And although, of course, we're going to go to the very detailed level of the text and the language chosen by the authors of the text, of course, I also want us to keep at the meta level as well, right? Otherwise, it's a really hard story to read anyway, but especially right now. Right. So not that Sodom and Gomorrah was a lot easier, or right, ousting Hagar and Ishmael, like that's not a lot prettier. But I really want to try to stay, which I don't usually do with this text, but I want to stay at a little bit at the meta level of the message of the story this year. What is the message of the story? All right. So whenever we're talking about the Israelite biblical text, we are always, of course, talking about what are the Israelites doing with the stories that are in the neighborhood? What is the Israelite innovation on those stories? How do the Israelites flip the narratives that are going around the ancient Near East? What are they trying to communicate in changing those narratives? Okay, that's always what we're looking for. What is the Israelite reconstruction, to use a phrase? How did the Israelites reconstruct the mythology of their time and of their neighborhood? Okay, so I want us to stay at that. What is the actual point of this story? As horrified as we are, even the subject of the story, but let's stay with what's the point of this for the Israelites? All right, so let's look at Genesis 22. And whenever we see Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ela, what does that mean? Remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ela, after these events, means, okay, stuff's been going on, but now something's going on. Now something's about to go down. Right? Life goes on, but Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ela, and it was after these things, something's coming that's going to tell us major event. Pay attention. Exactly. Good way to translate it. Pay attention, people. Here it comes. Elohim nisa et Abraham. God tests Abraham. Vayomer elav, and says to him, Abraham. And Abraham answers, Hineni. Right? So God calls to Abraham. Abraham answers with the correct response when God calls your name. The correct response is Hineni. What does Hineni mean? Here I am. I'm here. Right. But like God doesn't know that Abraham's there. So what does Hineni mean?
I'm paying attention to you.
And?
What do you want?
I'm ready.
Linda, what do you want? Hineni means I'm here. I'm ready. I'm making myself available for whatever it is you want of me right now, right? Hineni is a posture of receptivity and being ready to go. Okay. Vayomer. So now we just get, and he said, doesn't tell us who said, but Abraham just spoke Hineni. We know because we've read the story 16 million times that this is God speaking. Kachna, please take bincha, your son, yechidcha, your only one, asher ahavta, that you love, et Yitzchak, take Yitzchak, v'lech lecha el eretz hamoriah. Do those words look a little familiar?
Hello.
Lech lecha, wasn't this last week?
Yes.
God says, Lech lecha, go. Where does God tell Abraham to go last week?
To the place I'll show you.
To the place that I will show you. This week, God says, Lech lecha again, but gives Abraham an address. You're going to Moriah. So this is not going to be the kind of lech lecha of last week, pick up everything, move your entire life, leave your homeland, your father's house, right? The place of your birth. Remember that list that we got last week? We're getting a different list this week, but we're getting a list again. Lech lecha, not from, but with. We got a list of what he was leaving from last week. This week, we're getting an instruction about who he's to go with, and it's a long list. Why didn't God just say, Kach et Yitzchak? Take Yitzchak. Why is it, Bincha, Yichidcha, Asher Ahavta, Yitzchak? That is a very long list of Department of Redundancy department. Torah doesn't waste words. Clay, as we said last week, clay is heavy. This is written on clay tablets, people. That you don't waste this many words. Just say, take Yitzchak. So what is that for the rabbis? For the rabbis, this is an engraved invitation to Midrash. Why? Because for the rabbis, this is written by whom? God. So why would God waste all these words? God forbid. There must be a reason.
It's super important.
So for the rabbis, there's some stuff that isn't here. God says, take your son. Abraham says, I have two sons. God says, Yechidcha, your only one. Meaning the only one through Sarai, right? The only one through your actual wife, not your concubine. Abraham says, each is an only son to his mother. Asher ahavta, the one you love. Abraham says, I love them both. God says, okay, fine, take Yitzchak. So for the rabbis, that's why all these words are here, because there's a whole conversation between God and Abraham that we missed. And it's a lovely, actually, midrash that corrects the idea that Abraham loved Yitzchak best, which I also love. Right? That the rabbis read in here, our sages read in here, Abraham is saying, what do you mean, my son? I have two sons, Ishmael and Yitzchak. Take your only legitimate one. Each one is legitimate, right? The one you love. I love them both.
But it's defining for us. It's making a definition for the later readers.
Well, the rabbis read it that way. The text doesn't read that way. Right? Like the text just says, take your son, your only one, the one you love, Yitzchak. Right. So I love this midrash by the rabbis. Lech lecha and go, $25 to your favorite charity, Mark. Lech lecha, go, El Eretz HaMoriah, to the land of Moriah, V'ha'alehu sham le'olah, and ha'alehu, lift him up, make him go up there as what? What's an olah?
Sacrifice.
What is an olah? What is an olah? What kind of offering?
Burnt.
Holocaust.
Good God.
Take him and offer him up as a holocaust. This offering is one that is completely burned on the altar. Al achat harim asher amar alecha. On one of the mountains I will instruct you about. Okay. What does Abraham answer after this? Abraham has just argued with God about destroying Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay.
What does Abraham answer here? Abraham got up early in the morning. Abraham doesn't speak. Abraham doesn't answer. Right? For feminist readers of the Torah, this means Abraham has failed the test. He didn't argue. He argued for Sodom and Gomorrah, for the innocence of Sodom and Gomorrah that would be destroyed along with the guilty. He did not argue for Yitzchak.
He has time to come up with his argument. He hasn't gotten there yet, right? Maybe he hasn't said anything yet because he said, how am I going to argue out of this one?
All right, Richard, very rabbinic. Very rabbinic. Right? So our sages would say, of course, Abraham wants to argue, but he's going to give it a little time because he's got some time to get to Moriah, and he needs to come up with an argument because the argument for Sodom and Gomorrah didn't work. So Maybe I got to come up with a more creative case, right? Okay. Our sages would love that answer. Chazal would love that answer. Okay. He gets up early in the morning, so this shows eagerness. Wherever we see Vayeshkem Baboker, he got up early in the morning. It's a sign of eagerness. Hurrying to fulfill, right? Because you could just sleep in and take your time, which you would think you would want to do given what the task at hand is. So he gets up early, and he saddles his ass, and he takes his 2 slave boys with him, and Yitzchak beno, his son Yitzchak, vayavka'a atzei olah, and he broke up wood for the fire. All right. So we have this image. He's preparing, right? And what is he doing? He's taking, presumably, an axe, and he's chopping up wood. What's the next thing a knife in his hand is supposed to chop up? His son. So you cannot miss the literary allusion here that he's chopping wood, knowing the next thing he's going to pick up a sharp thing to do this to is his son. Vayakam, and he got up, Vayelech, El Hamakom Asher Amar Lo Elohim, to the place that God told him about. Moriah. All right. B'yom HaShlishi, on the 3rd day, Vayisa Avraham et Einav, and Avraham lifts up his eyes, Vayar et Hamakom Merachot, and he sees the place from afar. This parsha begins with Avraham lifting up his eyes. What does Avraham lift up his eyes and see at the beginning of this Torah portion?
The men coming.
The three
angels.
Strangers.
Right.
That turn out to be malachim, that turn out to be messengers, meaning in English, angels. There's no word for angels in Hebrew. It's messenger. Okay. So meaning messengers from God. So when Avraham lifts his eyes and pays attention, right, then he sees all these things connected to mission, right? Service. Okay. So he lifts his eyes and sees the place from afar. Now, they've been walking for 3 days. What's the conversation? Probably nothing, Mark says. You travel together 3 days in silence.
What are we doing?
And what does Abraham answer? If that's the conversation, what does Abraham answer?
He doesn't know.
So he says, I don't know.
He's going to kill him.
Right. He's not going to tell his son that.
No.
Presumably he's not going to tell his son that. So we get nothing.
I want you to do this.
We've got nothing about the conversation for 3 agonizing days. 3 messengers at the beginning of the story, 3 days here. Right? Okay. Nothing.
We haven't even discussed.
We don't know. So, right, this is, again, an invitation for the rabbis, for our sages, for a lot of midrashim that we're not going to go into. All right. Vayomer Avraham Na'arav, and Avraham says to the slave boys, Shvu lachem po, y'all stay here. Ima chamor, with the donkey. But I and the other Na'ar, the teenager who's my son, Neilcha adko, will go to a certain point, v'nishtachaveh v'nashuva alechem, and we will bow down, and then we'll come back to you. What is Abraham telling his slaves that he's doing? He's going to worship.
He's doing olah.
He's taking his son, and they're gonna yishtachavu. They're gonna bow down. Right? They're gonna worship. Okay. What does yishtachaveh look like?
Well, he's telling Yitzhak also that Yitzhak's coming back.
Nice. So he's signaling to Yitzchak, v'nashuva, and we'll come back.
Right.
Oh, really? What, in an urn? Right? He's going to be ashes at the end of this.
Now, if we go by this, it says, we will worship.
The nun in Hebrew does. But good paying attention to the English. In Hebrew, v'nashuva, and we will return. But remind me of that when we get to the end of the story. That's a very important noticing for the end of the story. And it's what Islam does with the story. All right. Vayikach Avraham et atzei ha'olah, and Avraham takes the wood for the Holocaust. Vayasem al Yitzchak beno, and puts it on Yitzchak his son, and he takes in his own hand the torch, the fire clicker, the eish, literally the fire, and hama'achelet, the cleaver. This is the word used for something you use to cut flesh. Some folks want to argue this is the one used for human flesh, like war or torture or whatever. But there are others who say no, it comes from the root la'achol, to eat. So it's the knife you would cut your food with and then stick it in your mouth, stick the food in your mouth. But it has to be strong enough to cut through meat, through flesh. So dad takes the dangerous stuff. We don't want you, son, to get hurt. Don't touch the sharp knife and don't touch the fire, right? But he puts the wood on Yitzchak. What does this suggest about Yitzchak's age?
He's old enough to carry it.
Yitzchak is not a toddler.
Yeah, he's strong.
Yitzchak is strong enough and old enough to carry the wood on his own back up a mountain. And does. Blah, 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 blah. Vayikach biyado, so he lives in Vayachu shnehem yachdav. Rick, to your point again. And they went, shnehem, the two of them, yachdav, together. We keep getting this. We will return. They walk together, both of them. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham. Now we get some conversation. Yitzchak says to Avraham, his father, and he says, Avi, daddy, Vayomer, and he says, Hineni. Hineni.
Well, Yitzhak would have no reason at this point to think anything was up.
Except he does. Because he says,
asking the question,
so,
something missing here.
So the irony, but let's not lose the irony of Avraham's answer. Hineni.
Right.
I'm here and I'm ready. But of course he's not ready. Right? Right? So he just said that to God, and now he's saying it to his son. Hineni b'ni. Here I am, my son. Vayomer, and he said, meaning now someone else is talking, so that's got to be Yitzchak. Hine ha'esh, here's the fire, v'a'itzim, and the wood. Ayeh hasel le'olah, where's the lamb for the Holocaust? So Yitzchak does notice something seems to be a little amiss.
Maybe he thought they were going to stop at a store on the west.
At the lamb store, right? A takeout. Vayomer Avraham.
And it took him 3 days to figure that out.
Well, it took him 3 days to speak about it. It also, we don't know there wasn't conversation before this. All we know is that this is the only conversation Torah chooses to share with us. Right? This is the only thing we're told. So the omniscient narrator only chooses to let us in on this scene. Who knows what's been going on for 3 days? Vayomer Avraham, and so Avraham answers him, Elohim yir elo haseh. God literally will see to the seh, the lamb. All right. He lifts his eyes and sees the messengers. He lifts his eyes and sees the mountain. He says, God will see to the lamb, which means take care of it. God will, just like in English, I'll see to it. It doesn't mean literally seeing, but you cannot miss that in the Hebrew. You cannot miss the beautiful play, the terrifyingly beautiful play on words using yireh here for God. Now, the rabbis also want to suggest that this might be a little hint from Avraham upstairs. God will see that there's a lamb to be offered on the fire.
And he says it loudly.
Loudly. Right?
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. God, can you get about the lamb thing? Maybe change the instructions? All right. So God will see, the lamb will be
Yes, but
right. Yeah. So lamb being the innocent, the gentle innocent that sacrificed. If we want to go to the meta level, I do believe Mark and Rick, my psychotherapists in the room, right? Innocence is sacrificed here. Innocence that your father is perfect and loves you unconditionally is sacrificed in this story. And we're going to see at the end the language used, but innocence for sure is sacrificed. Isaac will never be innocent again. That, and all of us have that moment where our innocence regarding our parents happens and is sacrificed, where we see them as flawed, where they hurt us and sacrifice us for their own needs or their own agenda or their own mission or their own priorities, right? And what we need is sacrificed. 100%. I have to believe psychoanalytically, this story is about the loss of innocence, which is one of the only ways I can redeem the story, right? Is that it is true. This is a myth. Mythology is always about what's true. For us, it gets dressed up as a story. What's always true, as long as there is parents and children, is that there's a moment when the child loses any illusion that their parent is perfect. Okay.
Do we know who's truly being tested here?
Lovely. You want to say more?
This could be Abraham's ultimate test of God.
Okay. Love that. So Abraham is saying, really?
How far are you willing to go?
Is this the kind of God you are?
Right.
Okay.
If this is the kind of God you are, then I've got no more use for you.
Okay. So maybe Abraham is giving God till the last second? Because clearly,
yeah,
he gives God till the last second.
He's kind of pathologically tied to this strategy.
Okay. Which brings us very close, I believe. And I believe this is also going on in this story. That brings us what did you just say? He's what? Pathologically tied to this strategy. This is radical fundamentalism at its most dangerous. When people are pathologically tied to a strategy they believe is ordered by God.
We've never seen anything.
We never see that. We never see that in the real world. This is a critique, I believe, so do a lot of scholars. This is a critique of Abraham being pathologically tied to understanding that God wants death of the innocent.
No. I mean that.
No, I get what you're saying, that he's tied to, he's going to go till the last second to test God. Right. I understand that. But related to that, there are many people who want to say this is an argument in the ancient world against being too consumed with the idea that God wants the sacrifice of innocence.
Use the word Yirah.
Where are you?
First line.
Yireh lo. God will see.
Yireh.
God will see to the lamb.
Yireh.
Huh?
Is Yireh trans?
No.
Doesn't mean fear.
No. God will see for him the lamb. God will see to it. Because this place is going to be named the place that I see, the place where I'm seen, where it's all tangled in Hebrew. So this word, Yireh, is all about Abraham seeing all through this parsha. How does Hagar know that there's water for her son and he won't thirst to death? What does she do? She lifts up her eyes and she sees the well. Right? So this parsha is all about seeing, what we choose to see, how we see, right? What we pay attention to. So God will see to it.
And how we avoid seeing.
And what we avoid seeing. All right.
Is there any connection?
Some commentators or rabbis would point to this as an example of religious fanaticism.
That the message of the story is against religious fanaticism.
Yeah.
Or well, not exactly. That's my gloss. But it's against death as the answer. And we're going to see in our commentary. Okay. So I want to move us along because I'm taking too long.
Is there any relation between se and sne?
Oh, I love that.
They just sound the same.
I love that.
First said se, sne meaning bush, as in the burning bush.
I love that.
When you first said se, I thought you said sne.
Because we have to write this midrash. Because what is the offering going to be in? Where does Abraham see it? Where does he see the ram? In the bush.
In the sne.
In the sne.
Which later gets burned somewhere else.
I love this. We have to write this midrash, Bert. We're going to be famous. All right. So they come to the place that God told them about. Vayivein shan Avraham et mizbeach, and he builds an altar, and he puts the wood on the altar. Vayakod et Yitzchak, and he binds Isaac. It's a similar set of letters to what he was doing with the wood, chopping and binding. These are very similar letters in Hebrew, and it's also Yaakod. What does that sound like to you? Yaakov. You cannot miss that in the Hebrew. Yaakod should be ringing Yaakov, who's going to be Isaac's son. So had the Yaakod gone through, there'd be no Yaakov. Okay. So he binds Isaac. This is only used here in Torah. This verb, it only appears here. And in rabbinic Hebrew, it's by the rabbis, it's used for binding the legs of animals. Okay. So he binds Yitzchak, and
Yitzchak doesn't fight back.
Presumably Yitzchak is old enough to fight back or to run.
Yeah, but he does.
And he puts him on the altar, on top of the eitzim, on top of the woods. So Rick is like having a hard time. Richard's like, he's testing. He doesn't have any intention of going through with it. Right? This is the... Okay. Vaishlach Avraham et yado, and he sends forth his hand. Avraham does. Who else sends forth their hand in the beginning of the book of Exodus?
Oh, Moses.
The maid servant of the daughter of Pharaoh. And what is she? She sends out her hand, and what does she get? The basket. He sends out his hand to get the knife to kill his son. She stretches out her hand in the beginning of the next book and saves the baby and takes it to Pharaoh's daughter as her son. Okay. This beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful. Okay. So he sends out his hand and he takes the ma'achelet. He takes the carving thing, lishchot et beno, to slaughter his son, except Richard says no. Nope. He's testing God here.
This is like the countdown on the timer. So you're seeing go 0, 2, 1.
Right. Okay. Vayikra elav malach Adonai. So he's got the ma'achelet. Now, even if he's testing God, what does Isaac see?
He just sees the knife.
He just sees his father holding a knife, and he's bound.
Oh dear.
On the. I knew Carol was going to have a hard time this morning. Didn't I say she was going to have a hard time this morning?
Yeah.
So he's bound on the wood, and he sees his father with the knife, presumably like this, with the cleaver, right? Do you think that image will ever leave Yitzchak?
Screwed up.
Screwed up for life. Once much of our Jewish neuroticism, right? Like, here we go. Here's the origins. Okay. Vayikra elav malach Adonai, and a malach of Yud Hey Vav Hey calls to him, to whom? To Avraham, mina shamayim, from the heavens, vayomer, and says, Avraham, vayomer, hineni. All right. So the malach calls Avraham, and he answers, hineni.
Okay.
So you cannot miss the hineni, right? All right. Why twice?
Emphasis.
Emphasis. Okay. So because it might be unclear who the angel's talking to as he's about to bring down the cleaver.
Maybe, yo, Abraham, this is important.
Because it's not important otherwise, this moment. Cleaver raised, about to come down.
Needed to stop.
It was urgent.
He needed a little late.
Rick is like, well, you're a little late if it's that urgent. All right. So for me, this is one of the places I read a criticism of fundamentalism, which is the angel had to call Abraham twice. He was so caught up in being sure that this was the will of God that he didn't hear the first time. He was too caught up. And so the angel has to go, no, like, stop.
Yeah.
Don't drink the Kool-Aid.
You've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Stop.
Snap out of it.
Snap out of it.
Snap out of it. It took twice because Abraham was so caught up in his own drama and being convinced that this is the right thing to do that the angel has to call him twice.
Fearful that
So
I gave you a job.
if the angel doesn't really execute, pardon the pun, execute the task, the angel could be in trouble, right? So the angel has some urgency here. Like, I don't want to be responsible for the progenitor of the people of Israel accidentally getting cleavered because I didn't speak loudly or urgently or big enough. Lovely. Love that.
Just a question. Are all the names of the angels ending in EL, like Ariel, Raphael?
That is mostly rabbinic. In Torah, we don't get names of angels. They're just Malach Adonai, anonymous angel, appears in the sneh, in the bush. An anonymous angel here calls Avraham. All right. I love the midrash that says, just go with me for a second. There's a midrash, a modern midrash that says, Sarah heard them get up. Who do you think makes the coffee in the morning? Right? Who's up before the men? The women. Sarah's no dummy. She's up. She hears Abraham sneaking around earlier than usual. Vayishkem baboker, got up early in the morning, or a little earlier and he goes and he gets Yitzchak and doesn't say anything to her, doesn't go through his normal routine. First thing in the morning, he takes Yitzchak and she's like, what's going on here, Abe? What are you doing with my boy? She says, this is her miracle baby. She's had him late after menopause. When the way of women has stopped with her. This is her miracle baby. You're just taking him without talking to me? I don't think so. And she follows. And there's a midrash that this is Sarah. Sarah is the voice that's hiding and says, Avraham. And he says, Hineni, here I am.
I like that.
Vayomer, and the voice goes on, right? Al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar. Do not send out your hand towards the lad, right? This is the lad. Al ta'aslo me'uma. Don't even harm a hair on his head. Ki ata, because now yadati, I understand, I know that you are God-fearing, because it's with an aleph, right? You are God-fearing. Like, you passed the test, check, you're good. This is Sarah, this makes sense, right? You're good. God's good with you just going this far.
You've done enough.
You've done it. Great. You passed the test. For Richard, God has just passed Abraham's test, right? For many readers, Abraham has failed the test. So for Ata, now I know, and Elohim sees Ata, you spelled differently, sounds the same. Ata, now I know, God knows, Ata, you did not withhold Bincha, your son, Yechidcha, your only son, from me. By Abraham et Einav, and he lifts his eyes. Of course, that's our story. He lifts his eyes, Vayar, and he sees, Behine Ayil Achar, and lo, there is a Ayil, there's a ram. Achar. What does achar mean? Huh? Achar? Behind.
Stuck.
Behind or after. Now, there's lots of argument in the scholarly literature about whether or not this is a typo, whether or not this is a copying error. The text has been copied for 3,000 years. Of course they do. So is this a scriptural, a writing error? Because if it's a writing error, what might that word be? All y'all who know Hebrew at all. There's a ram, achar, behind. What, look at the word achar, what could that be? If it's a spelling error, if it's a writing error. Echad. If that's not a resh, it's a daled, and there are no vowels in the Torah, so you just have to figure out how to vocalize whatever consonants are there. If they're just consonants, that makes more sense to a lot of scholars and there was a lone ram, meaning not a herd, just one. Then it makes a little more sense than there's a ram achar, after or behind. The thing I like about achar is when God puts Moshe in the cleft of the rock and causes all of God's self to pass by Moshe, what does God tell Moshe Moshe will be able to see?
Oh, you can only see my behind.
You can only see my achar. You can only see my behind, my after. You can only see my wake. You can't see me in the moment and live. You can only see my after effect. So there's a part of me that's like, I like that linguistic tie to the ram being achar and God's presence passing, and all Moshe can see is the achar. But I kind of buy that it might be a scriptural, a scribal error, that it really was echad.
Are there other examples of scribal?
Oh yes, plenty.
But I thought they had to go back and correct every mistake if they make a mistake.
No. You're misunderstanding what I'm suggesting.
Okay.
Originally, when the text, before it is codified, they're passing on versions. If you have one scribe who's the authoritative copy, and they've written the Dalet a little too short on the right side, everyone else reads it as a resh. So they think they're reading it right. They don't know it's an error.
But now it's different.
Now we know the text. So now we know when it's wrong. But in transmission, as it gets handed down from scribe to scribe, it's very possible one scribe has a handwriting that's a little different, and that Dalet looked to the next person copying like a resh.
Even now, if you make it reading the Torah, it has to be corrected too.
Yes.
Could it be both?
What? Achar and echad?
Yeah, there's some things in Judaism that's not either or, but both and.
Yes, but we have to translate a text.
Somewhere,
so
right.
So I don't think they're leaving it vague. I think it's probably a scribal error, but people became attached to this version.
Just makes it more interesting.
It's just more interesting, right?
Going back just a couple words,
Mm-hmm.
in the Greek book here it says he now could see.
Mm-hmm.
So what would the literal translation is the elder see or?
Beautiful, Justin. Beautiful, paying attention. Hagar looked up Vayar, and she saw the well. Did the well just appear, or was it always there? So this is where I want to go. Thank you for the segue. He looks and sees the ram. Was it there the whole time? But he was so consumed with being sure he knew what God wanted that he didn't see the option that maybe God had put there all along? Or does it kind of miraculously appear? We don't know. But what we know is he sees the ram. And what happens when he sees the ram? It was ne'echaz. It was this is from the word to grab. So it's grabbed by its karnav, by its horns, by the bush. But this is not bush. This is not, it's not sneh. It's the thicket. right? It's stuck. Vayelech Avraham. Remember? Lech lecha last week. Lech lecha this week. Go. Vayelech Avraham. And Avraham left. Again, Avraham went. Vayikach et ha'ayil. And he took the ayil. Vaya'alehu le'olah tachet beno. And he offered it as a holocaust in place. Well, it doesn't, yes, as a holocaust in place of his son. And he calls the place Yud He Vav He Yireh. God will see. Asher Ya'amer Hayom Behar Adonai Yireh. As it is said to this day, on the mountain of Yud He Vav He Yireh. He will appear. He will be seen. Right? It's very confusing in terms of what? But this is the mountain all of a sudden of seeing. Because our story is all about seeing. And clearly this mountain had that name. So this is a little bit how the elephant got its trunk, right? Why the elephant's nose is so long. It's one of those stories. And what is it? An etiology story, right? That explains how something got its name. Okay. So clearly this mountain has the tradition of being known as the mountain where God will be seen or will appear or something. What does that mean for the rabbis? What must this mountain be? Huh? If God's going to appear there, what mountain is this? It's Sinai. Of course it's Sinai. Right?
Is that the only mountain that we have named and a lot of our stories built around?
No, so this is Moriah, but actually it becomes identified with the temple. Right? This is the place that he's instructed to build the temple. What's there now?
The Al-Aqsa Mosque.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Where the Muslims think that Abraham was
doing what?
Isaac was not sacrificed, the rock.
What happens from the rock for Islam?
That Muhammad ascends to heaven.
Muhammad has his night vision, right? So that's about the prophet. But why would the prophet Muhammad have that be a place involved in stories about him in the Quran? Because it's a sacred place to Abraham, to the stories of Abraham. And this is the same mountain in Islam from this story that Abraham offers whom?
No,
Ishmael. He takes Ishmael to this spot, and right, so that it becomes sacred to Islam. Because if you're gonna replace the religion that came before yours and you want to convert everybody, you have to pick their holy places. Why was the temple, David's temple, why was it in Jerusalem? Why was it on that mountain? When David built the temple, why is it on that mountain? Because that was sacred to the Jebusites. You have to take the Canaanite holy places and make them about Yahweh now. The early Israelites had to take all the places that were holy to the Canaanites and make it holy to Yud He Vav He with a new set of stories that get mapped on to those holy places. This is what we do as human beings. That's just how it is. That's what we do. If we want to change the narrative, that's what we do. We change the narrative, but you have to take over the holy places if you want your religion to stick.
Didn't the Christians attach some significance to the rock too? What's their story? Because they also it's significant somehow.
Yeah, I forget.
Right? But there's
I forget.
Story.
Well, certainly we know what Christianity does with this story.
Jesus.
Yes. What? What about Jesus?
Well, Jesus had the cross, the wooden cross.
And what happened?
He sacrificed.
Crucified.
Jesus died on wood, offered up by his Father.
Oh, right.
God, the Father, offered his only Son, Yechidcha, Asher Ahavta, that he loved. It's exactly the repeat of this story. Of course it is. But guess what? Until Jesus, it is unfulfilled. Isaac lives. Jesus does not.
Except
Well,
Christians
we can
think
fast.
Jesus did.
He was resurrected.
He was resurrected.
I'm gonna breathe. I'm
died.
gonna breathe.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he came back.
No, he does not come back. That is later. The story is your guy who's supposed to be the Mashiach, who's supposed to be the anointed one, blah, 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 gets dead.
Because of you.
Now what do?
You have to make him go.
Come up a new story.
You gotta come up with another, you gotta come up with something. He's not dead, God forbid.
Right.
He ascended
Exactly.
to heaven and is there,
Yeah.
right? And will come back.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, your movement falls apart.
We have ambassadors going to Israel waiting for that.
Okay, we're not even going to get started on that. Very good. You're right to call me out on that. You're right. Wait, let's go there. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, verse 19. Because Mark is right. I promised I was going to read this. Vayashav Avraham el Na'arav. So we've just ended the scene where God is talking, I will make you a great nation because you you listened to my voice, right? You listened to my voice as God tells him to listen to Sarah's voice. And possibly what he listened to was Sarah's voice, who was actually fulfilling the will of God. So God calls it God's voice. Whoop, just saying. Okay. So we get the end of that narrative. And what are we told? Vayashav Avraham el Ne'erav. And Avraham returns to his slaves. Vayakumu vayachu yachtav. And they got up and they went together el Be'er Sheva, to Be'er Sheva. And Avraham dwelt in Be'er Sheva. Torah was very careful to say, he and Yitzchak went yachtav, together. And he said, we will return, Rick, as you so aptly noted. What does this text say?
It doesn't say anything about Yaakov.
Who returns?
Abraham.
And the servant lads.
El Na'arav, to his servant lads. He said to them, we're coming back.
At the beginning.
At the beginning.
Right.
And he returns.
Alone.
Where is
He's
Yitzchak?
at the Dodger game.
Huh? He got an apartment.
In Tel Aviv.
He flew the coop. You cannot miss the fact that Torah does not have them both return. Where's Isaac? There is a midrash that he was sacrificed.
Oh.
That's a whole nother set of whatever. As we talked about, the innocent in us is sacrificed or dies or whatever. But I have to believe there's no way Yitzchak was coming back down that mountain with dad.
Yeah.
They are now separate. And so again, back to our psychoanalysts in the room, we have to individuate from our parents. On some level, the child has to die. And we have to grow up and individuate and become separate from our parents and not just their story. Their story is not just about us. They have their own story. We have to grow up to see that. We have to grow up to know that we're not the center of their universe. Or even if we are, they have their own needs and wants and goals and desires and challenges and sorrows and sadnesses and failures and weaknesses and craziness. Right? It's not all about us. We didn't cause it. It's not our fault. How many times have we told that to people? It's not your fault. This was your parents' responsibility. It's not your fault, but it's also not all about you.
Maybe Isaac was escaping his fanatic father.
All right.
He was a religious zealot.
The other thing is that Abraham is in Beersheba, and where does Sarah die? Sarah dies in Haran.
They never get back together.
So
He goes back to his mother.
So possibly, or even if he's hanging out near dad in Beersheba, like somewhere in the family business near Beersheba, Sarah's out of there. Sarah's like, once she hears what's happened, she's out of there. She goes back to her folks in
She died
Haran.
in heaven.
She divorced him.
Yeah.
Okay.
What a story. That's an incredible story.
It's an incredible story.
Amy, can I ask you something about this? That midrash you said about how there's a midrash that Sarah followed them, but in the text it says that she said don't lay a hand on the lad. I mean, if that was true, if it was a mother, she wouldn't say the lad. My son.
No, she's pretending to be the angel, Betsy. She's not going to speak as Sarah. He's not going to listen to her. She's a woman.
So that's the midrash.
He's on a mission from Yahweh. He doesn't care what his wife has to say about it. That's why I didn't tell her.
So she's disguised as an angel.
She's pretending to be Abraham, right? Don't touch the lad.
Deep voice.
Right. Okay. So I guess this time in looking at the story, I was drawn to the ram a little bit this time, kind of thinking about things where we're at, what's going on in the world and stuff. And so the translation I've chosen on Safaria for y'all on your sheet is a translation that includes notes in the translation about places the Hebrew is unclear, like achar, right? So it's here in the italics, reading echad, right, with many ancient versions. Read echad, not achar. All right, so that's our verse that we're looking at. If we look at Pirkei Avot, which is part of the what verse? The Mishnah. If we look at Pirkei Avot, a part of the Mishnah, codified around the year 200 of the Common Era, so 200 CE. 10 things were created on the Sabbath at twilight. So just before God is going to come home from work and do Shabbos, God has to finish up the last paperwork of creation, right? What does God do in these last moments before God has to do Shabbos, which means God can't do any more work? God finishes by making the mouth of the earth, the mouth of the well, the mouth of the donkey, the rainbow, the manna, the staff of Moses, the shamir, the letters, the writing, and the tablets. And some say also the demons, the grave of Moses, and the ram of Abraham, our father. So there is a Mishnaic tradition that goes back to the very early parts of the Common Era that say that ram was created on the sixth day of creation, right before Shabbos. So all of these things that are created right at the end of creation, right before Shabbos, when God is finishing God's work to go home for Shabbos, the ram is one of those things created. That it was planned. So what are the rabbis saying? God always planned for it to be the ram, not Isaac. Just so we're clear. And why would you need to make this midrash unless you have some concerns that it was unclear, right? So I think there's a little rabbinic anxiety here about maybe some people will not get clear what the point of that story was. So they have this lovely midrash that the ram was created already, sixth day of creation, ready for this episode. Okay. The thing that would be used to shape the stones that would go in the breastplate of the high priest. It's a special kind of tool that you use when you're doing, Judith, what do you call working with a stone?
Carving, clefting,
Masonry.
cutting.
No, for jewelry.
Engraving?
No, that's a lapidary. What is it when you take a stone and you make it fit something?
You said it.
Sizing.
Who said that? What?
That was Margaret on the phone. Said the stone.
Okay. Yes. Used for making the stone fit in the thing it's supposed to go in. Okay. All right. Rabbi Neil Lovinger from Seeing the Ram. When the Mishnah suggests that the ram was always there, the thought is completed by the part of the verse that says that Abraham lifted up his eyes. The ram, Justin, to your amazingly close reading, the ram was always there in the sense that God, I hope, never intended for Abraham to really kill Isaac, but the ability to see the ram to perceive the better choice can be understood as the deeper and yet more everyday kind of miracle. The ram is always there if we will but lift up our eyes.
Amen.
Right? So this jumped out at me right now, right? Because I feel a little bit like I've got the cleaver and I don't know what to do with it. But I've got that cleaver raised. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, oh, right, right. The important thing about this story, Rabbi Amy Bernstein, is that we have to
lift up your eyes.
You have to lift up your eyes and see another alternative.
Right.
So
It's
how
like
does that
lifting
fit?
up your eyes is like what you could translate it, open your mind or raise your consciousness.
Yes. Yes. Look, I don't even have language for it. Like, get out of your own way enough to see that there's another possibility. You're the one in the way, right? This is, by the way, the story of my life, right? You're in your own way here, right? Okay.
Are you seeing that possibility?
No. No, but I'll show you at the end the closest I'm getting to it. Okay. Abraham said, Hineni, one more time, after an angel called his name twice to stay his knife-wielding hand. It took one mention of Abraham's name to begin his mission, but two to stop it. Abraham looked up trying to find a replacement for the child he never sacrificed. Although the narrative is all about following directions, and although Abraham stated unambiguously that God would show them sheep for sacrifice, it was actually Abraham who identified the animal. It was a ram, right? And then we get the quote of the verse 22:13. And then in the biblical tradition of renaming a location after an act of divine revelation, Abraham renames the place where he stood Adonai Yireh. God will see. Just like he said to his son, God will see to it. God did, or God was part of helping Abraham identify the ram as the replacement for his son. Why did that speak to me? Because what I realized is I always have understood this story to be that God provided the ram, right? Like, well, duh, like that's how the story goes. God, the ram, I grew up learning that the ram was made on the sixth day of creation, right? So God provided the ram, duh. So like, right. It wasn't until reading this that I'm like, but it was Abraham who identified the ram as supposed to be in place of his son. He didn't have to. The ram could have been there and he still could have gone through with it, right? He sees all of a sudden not only does he see the ram, that's about changing our perspective, whatever, but he also then says, oh, wait, the ram is what's supposed to be sacrificed, not my son. He identifies, God doesn't say, see that ram, offer that instead. I kind of always have had that as my understanding of the story. And it's like, that's not what it says. Abraham decides to sacrifice the ram instead. He decides this is a different solution. All right. Abraham saw the ram, yet he named the mountain after God's long-term vision, not his own immediate vision. Abraham had passed the final test of his loyalty, and in so doing, praised the God who did not ask him to sacrifice his son. There was a vision on that mountain that was unlike anything else Abraham knew of the ultimate sacrifices demanded in other ancient Near Eastern faiths. It was as if God said to Abraham through the slow pace of the narration and its silence, know forevermore that this new faith will be a radical departure from whatever you know. It will never demand child sacrifice as surrounding faiths do. Instead, it will demand ultimate trust, and you've earned that on this mountain today. Although Abraham was not asked to offer an animal, perhaps he saw in that ram stuck in the thicket a place of entrapment and pain, the symbolic representation of a life full of struggle that was finally easing. So God doesn't say offer the ram, but Abraham sees this thing stuck. Abraham has been doing this because he's told he's going to make of a son through Sarai a great nation. And it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And all he's got is Ishmael. And then God says, listen to Sarah, who's casting Ishmael out. How is he supposed to have a child who's going to bring about a nation? And finally, he gets Yitzchak. And then acknowledging that he's not to hurt Yitzchak. That is not what this new tradition demands. This new tradition will be different from all the ones around you that glorify, in some ways, the offering up of a human. This is a new tradition, and you are not to do that. And maybe in that, Avraham senses, right, in offering the ram that was stuck, that he frees, right, he offers that as an offering, the way he feels his life opening up, having been struggling for so long. I love that. Carol sighing over here.
That was Bert.
It was Bert.
So is Bert. Okay, so Jonathan Sachs reminds us that we have to remember where he comes from, where Abraham comes from. The patriarch had complete control over the entire clan, the power of life and death. This is still true in many parts of the world. The patriarch, the male leader of the family, has ultimate control, life and death, over the whole clan. And if you don't believe it, think about honor killings in other places in the world. If the patriarch orders an honor killing of a bride that they suspect has stepped out, she's burned alive. But it still happens. So the Torah is opposed to every element of this worldview. As anthropologist Mary Douglas notes, one of the most striking features of the Torah is that it includes no sacrifices to dead ancestors, which all of the surrounding ancient Near Eastern cultures did. Seeking the spirits of the dead is explicitly forbidden, which all of the neighboring cultures did. Equally noteworthy is the fact that in the early narratives, succession does not pass to the firstborn, as it did in all of the surrounding cultures, not to Ishmael, but to Isaac, not to Esav, but to Yaakov, right? Not to Reuven, the firstborn, but to Levi. All right. And on and on and on. What God was doing when God asked Abraham to offer up his son was not requesting child sacrifice, but something quite different. God wanted Abraham to renounce ownership of his son, wanted to establish as a non-negotiable principle of Jewish law that children are not the property of their parents. That is a huge insight and statement about, right? Because isn't that still the challenge?
Yes.
That they don't belong to us. They come through us. They belong to the universe. When they handed me that baby and I saw those big black eyes, her biological father had hazel eyes. Have you seen my eyes?
Yeah.
How blue they are? They handed me this black-eyed baby. And I was like, first of all, I looked at Peg and I said, are you sure? Like, are you sure this is the one? And she's like, I saw them cut her out of you. Yes. And like, I had this moment of like, I don't know who this is, but this could not be my baby. And I looked at her and I went, well, of course she has big black eyes because the universe is saying she's not you. She is not yours. She's mine.
Yeah.
She belongs to me. She is her own person. She came through you. And every time I look in that child's eyes, right, I'm reminded because it's so hard, right? But this story, as far back as this is saying, they don't belong to you, literally, in the case of the progenitor, of the patriarch having power, but also get it, people. They don't belong to you. They are individuals.
At that moment, birth, that you're powerfully feeling they are
That what?
part of you.
Yes. No, part of you, yes. But a part of you that, here's the torture of parenthood, which I don't know why it continued. I don't know how parenthood continued, because the torture of it is, yes, you bring them into this world in great agony, and you're healing from that, and they're part of you, and you identify them as part of you, and then what are you supposed to do? Relinquish them to their own destiny.
Right.
There's an old
That's a horrible job description. And if you do it right, they leave you and
yes
say bye-bye. I'm going to the East Coast to go to college.
They come back.
We give them the roots, they get the wind.
Just saying.
And the other will come back.
The Torah is revolutionary, not only in relation to society, but also in relation to the family. To be sure, right, slavery not yet been abolished, the rights of women were not actualized yet, but the birth of the individual, the integrity of each of us as a moral agent in our own right was one of the great moral revolutions in history. For me, this also jumped off the page this week because I have to remember that this is a democracy. How did I get there? This is a democracy, which means every individual has a vote. And if we truly take seriously the notion of the value of the individual, and that is what a democracy does, then we have to figure out, okay, now what? We have to lift our eyes and figure out, all right, because this I understand. The cleaver over the head, I understand. But if we truly take seriously the value of the individual and individuals having the right to shape the destiny of a democratic society, then I can't drop that cleaver right where I've got it aimed. That's if you really value the individual and you really value a democracy and you really value that we have the right to control that as a populace, then I have to find the ram. I'm gonna have to look for the ram.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.